Amazing Grace. The lyrics of that most popular Christian hymn were written by John Newton. The lyrics are based on John Newton's experience of receiving God's grace and mercy despite the terrible things he had done, thus eventually living a joyful and peaceful life. Let's take a listen. John Newton was engaged in slave trade and led a very immoral life. During a violent storm off of the coast of Ireland in 1748, their ship was about to sink, and John Newton, and all of the slaves in the ship were going to drown. John Newton was on his knees at this point. Newton prayed desperately to God to save him and his ship from sinking. He added, "If you, God, save us from this disaster, I will spend the rest of my life for you." As the ship was tossed about back and forth, the ship miraculously reached in safely to the shore. And the story says he entered the seminary and became a pastor in the Anglican Church. While he was in the seminary, he started reflecting on the incident that happened in his life, that particular event of almost facing death, including his slaves. And he started writing his feelings, his thoughts, which is now this beautiful hymn, Amazing Grace. John Newton marks this event as his moment of conversion to Christianity. In the gospel today, after an encounter with the Lord, the man who is blind becomes an evangelist. The religious leaders, refusing to see the amazing grace at work in this man's life, shut their eyes to the miracle that has taken place, denounced the man as a sinner, and threw him out of the synagogue. By the end of the story, an ironic reversal of fortune takes place. The blind man sees, and those who claim to see are spiritually blind. My friends, why do we do bad things, or why do bad things happen to good people? Why indeed was the question of the mind in the minds of the disciples at the beginning of the gospel. Notice how the gospel story begins. The disciples asked Jesus, "Rabbi, who sinned this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Whose fault is it? Now notice how sinners operate. Instead of having compassion on the man born blind, they want to assign blame so that they can have the comfort of believing they can avoid this infirmity. People with a physical or mental disability ought to be treated with the same love and respect as anyone else. Jesus makes that very clear when he restores sight to this blind man. This blind man not only receives physical sight, but also gains spiritual sight as the story progresses. He begins by referring to his healer as the man called Jesus. His spiritual sight progresses when he refers to Jesus as a prophet. At the end of the story, his spiritual sight becomes crystal clear when he confesses Jesus as the Lord. The drama heats up as our hero's spiritual sight becomes restored to the point where he becomes an evangelist. He takes it on himself. Just like the woman at the well last week, the story begins with this man alone and in isolation, but coming out very strong to preach the good news to others. My friends, who are we in this story? I would like to suggest that we are all, every one of us, the man born blind. The sight that is given to us at birth, it is not sufficient for seeing God. We are all now challenged to see the world differently because of that amazing grace. And what would happen if we saw the world around us with Jesus' eyes? If you look at others and see Jesus present, how do we treat them? Would we look at our family members differently if we saw them with Jesus' eyes? Think about it. Would we look at our co-workers differently if we saw them with Jesus' eyes? Would we look at the unborn, struggling families, people who live on the periphery, people with infirmity, people experiencing homelessness? Would we look at them differently if we saw them with Jesus' eyes? During this scrutiny, the second scrutiny on the fourth Sunday of Lent, the elect, you have been already enlightened to some degree. Lent is a time when this is intensified for you and for us who are already Catholics. Can you look in the mirror with the same love and kindness Jesus has for you? Can you accept the invitation to see yourself with a different sight, like what an unnamed man saw in the waters of Siloam? The reading for year B says, God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, so that we may have life and life in abundance. Amazing grace. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, and now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see.